Rose Blumkin immigrated from Russia, couldn't speak a word of English, and started Nebraska Furniture Mart in 1937 with just $500 in savings. Warren Buffett raved about her work ethic, pointing out that she worked hard every day until she was 103 years old. He calls her Mrs. B. She was a retail legend who refused to borrow money, kept her prices brutally low, and knew every single inch of her furniture store. World War II stalled her business big time. And at the year end of 1946, the company's net worth had grown to only $72,000, $264. Competitors all probably assumed she would go bankrupt. On paper, it looked for sure like she would. In fact, at the end of that year, cash, both in the till and on deposit, totaled $50. And as he writes about it in his letter to Berkshire Hathaway employee investors, Buffett says, no, that's not a typo. It was $50. Buffett said that her business looked like it would go bankrupt unless you saw that one invaluable asset that most people overlooked. That went unrecorded in 1946 figures because Louis Blumkin, Mrs. B's only son, had rejoined the store after 4 years fighting in the U.S. Army. Louis fought at Normandy's Omaha Beach following the D-Day invasion. He earned a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in the Battle of the Bulge, and he finally sailed home in November of 1945. And once Mrs. B, this Russian who couldn't speak English when she got over here, and her son Louis were reunited, there was no stopping Nebraska Furniture Mart. Driven by their dream, the mother and son worked days, nights, and weekends, and the result was a retailing miracle. By 1983, that pair had created a business worth $60 million. Buffett bought 80% of her company in 1983 after a single afternoon of conversation, no lawyers, no contract. I think it was his birthday, and he said it was just a handshake. He later called her the smartest businesswoman I've ever met. The business that she started, National Furniture Mart, or NFM for short, now owns the 3 largest home furnishing stores in the U.S. And in 2020, in his Berkshire letter, he said that each of them sales record in 2020, which was pretty incredible because they were closed for more than 6 weeks because of COVID-19. Buffett said that when Mrs. B's large family gathered for holiday meals, she always asked that they sing a song before eating, and she always selected the exact same song, Irving Berlin's God Bless America. That's just one of many of the stories that Warren Buffett records in his 2020 shareholders letter. Let me confess something to you. I know it kind of shows that I'm a geek, but I love reading Warren Buffett's annual letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. I am a Berkshire shareholder, and I know that it makes it sound like I'm a total nerd or someone who enjoys 20 pages of fine print and footprints for fun. But the thing is, Buffett's letters are masterclasses in leadership. They're not flashy. He doesn't try to sound smart. He just plainly tells the truth. And he does it with humor, with humility, and with wisdom. When I went back and reread the 2020 Berkshire Hathaway letter, I thought this isn't just business advice, this is biblical. Because Warren Buffett, whether he knows it or not, is often echoing spiritual truths about stewardship, humility, and faithfulness that we see all over Scripture. About a month ago, I filmed a YouTube video of Christian leadership lessons from Buffett's most recent 2024 letter. As of tonight, when I'm recording this, that video has been viewed well over 210,000 times. I'm hoping it will be my first video on this channel to surpass 1 million views. So I decided to systematically work backwards through Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway shareholder letters, rereading them myself, and pulling out Christian leadership lessons. So I've done 23, 22, 21, and now I'm doing the 2020 letter. I want to share with you 5 powerful lessons from Buffett's 2020 letter. These are probably the most famous investing letters in the world, but I find a lot of people haven't actually read them. I want to give you lessons that can change how you lead, how you run your business, and even how you live your life. Each one comes straight from Buffett's writing, but each one also ties directly to biblical leadership. Let's dive in. Lesson number 1, the humility to admit mistakes. I mean, we're starting with a really humbling moment. Buffett admits early on in the letter that one of the biggest blunders he's ever made. He says, quote, that ugly $11 billion write-down is almost entirely the quantification of a mistake I made. Now pause there. How many billionaires do you know who start their annual shareholder letter by saying, hey, I really messed up and it cost $11 billion. No excuses, no scapegoats. He doesn't say the market shifted or COVID hurt us or my team misled me. He says, I was simply too optimistic. That's leadership humility. He still praises the CEO of Precision Castparts, saying he's passionate, he's excellent, but Buffett says, I overpaid. He admits it. He owns it. He was overly optimistic about what that company could do for him. I mean, that's a great word for you and me, right? Let's be honest. We love to take credit for the wins, but we like to outsource the losses. We'll say the economy was rough, My team didn't execute. When we have a great year, we like to take credit, but when it's a horrible year, we have a ton of excuses that we make, right? Someone once said excuses are like armpits. Everyone's got a couple of them and they stink. Oh, I didn't have the right people. The truth is, real leaders own their mistakes. When you mess up in your business, your church, your family, people already know it. They saw it, they felt it, your kids know it. So why not lead with the strength of honesty? The Bible says in Proverbs 28:13, whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but whosoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy. When you hide your mistakes, you shrink. When you confess them, you grow. And here's what I love. Buffett didn't lose credibility because of his $11 billion mistake. He gained credibility because he was honest about it. As a shareholder, when I read that, I appreciate it. That's the paradox of leadership. People will forgive your failure. They will not forgive your faking. So let me ask you, what's your Precision Cast Parts? That was the name of the company that didn't do as well and they had to do the $11 billion write-down. What's the decision you made that didn't pan out, that you've been quietly wishing everyone would forget? Maybe it's time to do what Buffett did. Own it, name it, laugh at it if you can, learn from it. Because here's the secret. When you admit you were wrong, you're not losing authority, you're earning trust. And trust is the currency of leadership. So that's lesson 1, humility. Now let's talk about what Buffett calls boring brilliance. Lesson number 2 is build what lasts, not what's flashy. Build what lasts, not what's flashy. You've probably heard someone say, if you want to succeed, you have to hustle harder. And while hard work matters, Buffett does have a different take on this. He literally says, you are awarded no points in business endeavors for a degree of difficulty. In other words, stop trying to make everything so complicated. Don't buy an incredibly difficult business. Buy a business that's already succeeding. He even quotes Ronald Reagan, who once said, hard work never killed anyone, but why take the chance? Why work harder than you have to? That's kind of Buffett's humor. It's dry, it's honest, it's true. Buffett learned this lesson the hard way. He started with a failing textile company, and for 20 years, he tried to save it. He poured in effort, strategy, sweat, money, but he found out it was fighting a losing battle. And finally, his good friend Charlie Munger convinced him it's better to own part of a great business than all of a bad business. Let that sink in. It's not about doing everything, it's about doing the right thing. Some leaders, maybe even you, are exhausted not because you're lazy, but because you're doing too many hard things that don't ultimately matter. Jesus said in Matthew 7:24, the wise man built his house on the rock. You remember that story, right? The storms came, the winds blew, the floods rose, but that house stood firm. But what did the foolish man do? Maybe you have sung about this as a kid in Sunday school. The foolish man built his house on the sand. The same storm, but a totally different outcome. That house was wiped out. That's Buffett's business philosophy. He builds on rock, durable companies with real value, real people, and real ethics. He's not chasing hype, he's building foundations. And you know what? That's something good for Christian leaders too, isn't it? Don't confuse movement with progress. Don't confuse busy with fruitful. God doesn't need your hustle, he wants your obedience. If you're a pastor, focus on discipling people, not just drawing huge crowds. If you're an entrepreneur, build something that lasts longer than your next quarterly report. If you're a parent, don't just raise achievers, raise disciples. That's building on rock. So here's a simple challenge. Grab a notepad this week and make 2 columns. On one side, you can write sand, and on the other side, write rock. Under sand, list the things that keep you busy but don't really last. And under rock, write the few things that will still matter 10 years from now. And then start building there. Because Buffett's right. You don't get points for difficulty. You get results from direction. Now, speaking of direction, Buffett's next principle might be his greatest superpower. And it's one of the most spiritual truths in business. It's the power of compounding. So lesson 3, let compounding work for you. Buffett loves math, but the math that made him rich isn't complicated. It's just consistent. In the letter, he explains how Berkshire slowly increases its ownership in Apple without spending another dime, simply because both companies keep buying back shares. He says the math of repurchases grinds away slowly, but can be powerful over time. Did you hear that? Powerful over time. Every time Apple rebuys shares, that makes Buffett's investors richer because of, I think Berkshire at the time of the 2020 letter maybe owned like 5.6% of Apple. That's the key. Buffett isn't chasing quick flips. He's letting time do the heavy lifting. And that's not just a financial principle, that's a biblical principle. And if you've ever studied the law of compounding, it's remarkable. Galatians 6:9 says, let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Compounding isn't just about money, it's about faithfulness. When you pray daily, that compounds. When you encourage someone, that has a compounding effect. When you make one wise financial decision a month, that compounds over time. When you build trust with your team, that compounds. You might not see the results in a week or even a year. One day, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you'll look back and you'll say, wow, look what God has built through consistent obedience. I mean, think about your health. You don't lose 30 pounds by running one marathon. Lost about 14 pounds and I need to lose about 28 more. But it's not one day. You lose it by skipping desserts, by walking daily, by drinking water, by counting calories, by small, boring things done faithfully. The same is true in your leadership. Buffett calls it the magic of compounding. You could call it the miracle of stewardship. When you're faithful with a little, God makes you ruler over much. Now, here's the almost funny thing. Most people give up right before the compounding kicks in. They plant seeds on Monday and dig them up on Friday wondering, why didn't anything grow? Don't do that. Keep sowing, keep watering, trust the process, and trust God's timing. So here's your challenge. Pick one area of your life where you want to see long-term fruit and commit to one small daily habit for 30 days. It could be reading a chapter of Proverbs each morning for the next 31 days. It could be putting $10 a day into savings. It could be encouraging one person on your team every afternoon, just sending them a quick text. Small seeds grow mighty trees. Remember, Buffett didn't get rich by being brilliant, he got rich by being boring. And in God's economy, boring faithfulness is often the most beautiful form of obedience. Now let's zoom out, because Buffett isn't just talking about personal habits, he's talking about hope. And that leads to one of the most uplifting lines he's ever written. Lesson 4 is never bet against America. And from a spiritual standpoint, I would say never bet against God's plan. Buffett ends his letter with this line, our unwavering conclusion, never bet against America. Now you could take that as patriotic, and it is, but it's deeper than that. He's saying even when things look bleak, don't lose faith. And he proves it by telling story after story after story of small town heroes. Mary C. with C's Candies, Leo and Lillian Goodwin, who started Geico with $100,000, Rose Blumkin, who I talked about earlier, Mrs. B, the Russian immigrant who couldn't speak English and started Nebraska Furniture Mart, just a handful of money and worked until she was 103 years old. These are not Wall Street tycoons. These are ordinary people with extraordinary grit. And Buffett says something beautiful. These builders needed America's framework for prosperity, and America needed builders like them. That's partnership. And it's true in the spiritual realm as well, isn't it? God builds his kingdom the same way, through ordinary people who dare to believe that he's not done yet. You might be watching this feeling discouraged. Your business is struggling, your church attendance is down, you're tired. Let me remind you, never bet against what God is building. He's not finished with your story. He's not finished with your calling. He's not finished with this country. God has always used small beginnings to do great things. Remember David with the 5 smooth stones? Remember Gideon with his 300 men against a huge army? Remember Jesus starting with 12 disciples, one of whom betrayed him, and somehow the movement still changed the world. That's compounding faith in action. So take heart. Buffett looked across decades of American turmoil, recessions, wars, inflation, pandemics. He's writing this in 2020, right, during COVID-19. And he said, I still believe. How much more should you, a follower of Jesus, say, I still believe in God's promises? You know Romans 8:28, right? That God works all things together for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose. All things, even 2020. So yes, never bet against America, but more importantly, never bet against God's sovereignty. He's still in control of the markets, the nations, and even your next move. He's in control of your kid's bedtime. Now, Buffett's final theme may be my favorite one of all because it's about people. It's about trust. And it's about a leadership principle that every Christian leader must master. So lesson number 5 is think like a partner, not a performer. Buffett says something remarkable in this letter. He writes, although our form is corporate, our attitude is partnership. He's talking about how Berkshire runs like a family business built on trust, not hype. He reminds shareholders, we will treat you as partners, and so will our successors. And then he tells stories about how his earliest investors were family friends, even a group of small-town doctors in Ohio, and even some of his own personal family members. These people weren't financial geniuses. They just trusted Buffett. They knew that he would protect their capital like it was his own. And he says that trust has guided every decision we've ever made. That group of people just stayed invested as Berkshire continued to grow. And he talked about several of those doctors are in their 90s now and have stayed invested all these years. And Buffett doesn't mention it, but I'm sure they've made tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions. My favorite part of the letter is where Buffett features businesses that Berkshire has bought, and he talks about their founders. I started the video telling you about Rose Blumkin and Nebraska Furniture Mart and her decorated war hero son who came back to help her build it into something incredible. A second family I want to talk about is the Clayton family from Knoxville, Tennessee, where my youngest brother married a girl who grew up in Knoxville. Clayton Homes founder Jim Clayton and later his son Kevin. Jim started Clayton Homes in 1956 after building one single house with his brother. He later expanded into manufacturing and financing, turning it into the nation's largest home builder for manufactured housing. When Berkshire acquired Clayton in 2003, Jim and Kevin insisted on keeping their Tennessee roots and their Christian values central to the company. Kevin still runs the business today with the same culture of humility and innovation that made them successful in the first place. And Buffett said Clayton Homes exemplifies steady hands at the wheel. A third thing would be the C family, S-E-E, from C's Candies. The founders were Mary C. and her son Charles. And Mary C. opened her first candy shop in 1921 in Los Angeles with recipes from her home kitchen. Her old-fashioned motto, quality without compromise, became C's enduring philosophy. When Buffett and Munger bought C's in 1972 for $25 million, it was doing $30 million a year in sales at that time, total sales. Since then, it has produced over $2 billion in pre-tax profits for Berkshire. That's profits, all while never cutting corners on ingredients or service. Buffett credits C's with teaching him, quote unquote, the power of a wonderful brand. Fourth family, the Haslam family, Pilot Flying J, the founder of Clayton Homes, founded in Knoxville, introduced the Haslam family, also from Knoxville, Tennessee, to Warren Buffett. Jim Haslam had started a single gas station in 1958 and grew it into Pilot Flying J, the largest network of truck stops in North America. When Berkshire invested in this company, Buffett admired that the Haslams built their empire through partnerships with truckers, people who keep America's economy moving. And Buffett called it a true family business built on trust. Today, the company operates more than 750 travel centers and employs tens of thousands of people across the U.S. and Canada. The common thread in each of these families was that they started small, often with little capital, typically bootstrapping their way up. They operated with integrity and long-term focus. They treated customers and employees like family. They built local businesses that became national treasures. And when Berkshire bought them, the family stayed on, continuing to run these businesses with the same spirit of stewardship that they founded them with. As I mentioned earlier, Buffett summarized it by saying these builders needed America's framework for prosperity, and America needed builders like them. Now, let's be real. In our day, that's rare. Most companies today treat investors like numbers. Most leaders treat their teams like resources. A lot of pastors, even if we're honest, feel pressured to perform rather than shepherd. But Buffett says we're not performers, we're partners. And that's a powerful shift for Christian leaders, isn't it? Because God doesn't call you to perform for him. He calls you to partner with him. Jesus said in John 15:15, I no longer call you servants, but friends. That's partnership. Leadership is not about spotlight, it's about stewardship. When you stop trying to impress people, you can start to bless people. Buffett refuses to chase Wall Street approval. He literally says, we already have the investors we want. He'd rather have a few loyal long-term partners than a million impatient speculators. And isn't that what ministry should be like? Wouldn't you rather have a few faithful disciples than a crowd of consumers? So here's a practical challenge. Write one thank you note this week to someone who's quietly partnered with you. An employee, a volunteer, a spouse. Let them know that you see them, because partnership is the fuel of kingdom leadership. When Paul wrote his letters, he always started with gratitude. I thank God for you. That's how you build longevity, not through charisma, but through covenant partnership with people. So we've talked about humility, we've talked about faithfulness, compounding, hope, partnership. Now let's tie it all together, because Buffett ends his letter the way a Christian should live their life. Buffett points out that Berkshire owns more property, plant, and equipment in America than any other company, more than AT&T, more than ExxonMobil. And he says that doesn't automatically mean success, but it shows how much we've invested in real things, not speculation, not hype, not get rich quick. And then he adds this: our leadership in fixed assets doesn't mean we're perfect, but we believe it will yield the right returns over time. Over time. That phrase runs throughout this entire letter, over time. And it should run through your leadership too, because faithfulness isn't about a single moment. It's about a lifetime. Proverbs 13:11 says, dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers little by little makes it grow. Buffett has done that in business. You and I can do that in life. Little by little, you build up trust. Little by little, you grow in wisdom. Little by little, you see fruit. And when the storms come, when the markets drop, when life gets hard, and all of those things will happen, that's when the foundations you built on rock will hold firm. So don't quit. Don't rush. Don't compare your chapter 1 or 2 to someone else's chapter 20 or 30. God's not grading your speed. He's forming your soul. And maybe you need that reminder today. You don't have to be perfect. Just try to be faithful. Buffett was 90 when he was writing this 2020 letter about 5 years ago, and he was still learning. He was still laughing at himself. He was still admitting mistakes. He's proof that humility, patience, wisdom, stewardship age well. And if a man who's worth well over $100 billion can admit mistakes and play the long game, then surely we as Christian leaders can do the same with eternity in view. Because our dividends aren't just measured in dollars. They're measured in souls and influence and joy and obedience in a future generation. I try to personally pray regularly that Warren Buffett will come to faith in Jesus Christ. If you're a Christian, I hope you pray for him as well. But there's so much we can learn from Buffett. Right? Can you lead with humility? Will you build on rock? Will you let faith compound? Do you hope in God's sovereignty? And can you lead as a partner in God's mission? Never bet against America, but even more, never bet against the kingdom of God, because in the end, every wise investment of faith will yield eternal return. If this encouraged you, share it with another leader who's tired, someone who needs hope, and take this week to reflect. What would Warren Buffett's wisdom look like through the lens of your faith? Because the Bible and Berkshire might have more in common than you think. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Nathan Crockett, and I'll see you next time, hopefully. Keep leading, keep learning. If you enjoyed this video, consider sharing it with a friend or subscribing to this channel. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.